Next, I am very honored to have Menasche here from Disability Rights California. She's another one of my coworkers. She's come out to my groups in boarding cares and locked mental health facilities, and she has given information to people to help them access housing, to maintain their housing. She has taught them how to use the law to empower them to advocate for themselves. And I can't say enough good things about all the things that Anne has taught me about equal access in housing. She's a very passionate advocate in the community. And when you hear her talk, and then you'll see for yourself. Because of Anne, many community members now have equal access to a lot. So I'm going to let her take it from here. Again, thank you very much. Here's Anne.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Does this sound okay? Okay, cool. Okay, so how many people have heard of the expression, canary in the mines? Is this a real old one, or people? Yeah. All right. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what it is. It's an allusion to caged canaries that miners would carry down with them into the mine tunnels. And if the carbon dioxide got to a really dangerous point, the gases would kill the canary. And then the miners would know to hightail it out of there quickly, right? Or they would die too. So the expression has come from that experience of working in the mines, and that's called canary in the mines. And I'm going to assert here today that people with disabilities are the canaries in the mine of our affordable housing and homelessness crisis. Just like the canaries, people with disabilities are often the poorest of the poor and on fixed incomes, and they are currently probably a majority of our growing homeless population. They're an early indicator of the severe problems in the fabric of our society, slowly eroding access to housing, which of course is a necessity of life. I'm going to start with a story. I used to live in San Francisco a long time ago, in the 1970s when I attended law school. When people think of San Francisco, do you think of a place that's cheap or expensive to live? Really expensive, right? Okay. For now, I looked recently in a San Francisco newspaper, and I think that they were advertising one bedrooms for $5,000 a month or something absurd like that. So really, really expensive. When I lived there, housing was dirt cheap. I lived in a 3-bedroom flat near the Haight-Ashbury, which rented for $240 a month for the entire flat. Because housing was so cheap, students, artists, people who were activists and wanted to do political work, so they only worked part-time. They all could survive in San Francisco. You could survive with a part-time job, with a small income. You could survive on SSI. I had a friend who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she was my roommate for a time. She later moved into her own studio apartment, and she actually went to the movies with me, and the reason that's remarkable is not because of going to the movies, but because she could actually pay rent and go to the movies at the same time on her SSI, which she was able to do. It was not until the 1980s that rents began rising very rapidly, and that's the first time I began to notice homeless people on the streets. Before that, you didn't see any homeless people on the streets. For a time, my friend ended up actually living in her car until she moved out of state, where rents at the time were a bit cheaper. Oh, okay. Is that better? Okay. So, what causes homelessness? This is a little test that I give to my law clerks when they come in to see if they pass. And some do and some don't. A lot of them don't pass, but that's okay because they're working with me to learn about what causes homelessness and the lies and the misinformation that's out there about homelessness. There is now at least 2.5 to 3.5 million Americans homeless. They're living in temporary shelters, in vehicles, or on the streets. There's another 7.4 million Americans that are doubling up with friends or family, and at least 1.2 million school children that are homeless. Homelessness disproportionately affects people of color and people with disabilities. Probably currently, a majority of people on the streets or living in vehicles in San Diego have mental health and/or physical disabilities. About 11% are veterans, many with post-traumatic stress disorder or physical ailments coming from their service. 15% are survivors of domestic violence, and for women, domestic violence is a leading cause of homelessness. Now, the powers that be have a lot of myths that they perpetrate about homelessness. And they spend millions on consultants and studies to try to figure out what is going on. And what I recommend to our mayor and to other people who perpetrate these myths is they go back and study first grade arithmetic, because it really is a simple matter of arithmetic. What we have with the housing crisis is capitalism run amok, unregulated real estate speculation, and rental housing conversion that has caused rents to skyrocket and leaving less and less housing that is affordable, and affordable housing less available. And I've been in Disability Rights California since 2002, and when I first worked there, I had a case involving the conversion of the Maryland Hotel. It was in downtown San Diego. There was about, I don't remember, it was 220 people who lived there, mostly people with disabilities, low-income people. And they were evicted, and the property was converted to a boutique hotel for tourists. And I'm sure many of those people are now homeless. So there's a couple of laws that people should be aware about in our state legislature that have caused a real problem and made us lose affordable and accessible housing in the city. One is the Ellis Act. That's what caused us to lose that case ultimately, the Maryland Hotel case. And that case said that a property owner could do whatever they want with their property, including convert it to whatever they want, take it out of the rental business, and kick out low-income tenants. So that's the state law and the Ellis Act. Then there's the Costa-Hawkins Act. And the Costa-Hawkins Act basically says the only rent control you can have is the kind that is not effective, basically, that you can have no control over rents once people move out, which obviously motivates landlords to kick out tenants. And it exempted a bunch of new construction from rent control. So when people say, well, look, San Francisco has rent control, it doesn't work. It didn't work. Well, the reason it didn't work is because you have a law like the Costa-Hawkins Act that makes the rent control ineffective. So this is really what has caused all this unregulated speculation and the conversion of affordable housing to something else. At the same time, since the 1970s, public benefits have been frozen with declining purchasing power, and they're far less available. And we're talking about things like SSI. 4.8 million adults receive SSI benefits because of disabilities that render them unable to work. And that's a lot of people. And the SSI benefits are minuscule. They have not risen in a very long time, at approximately $900 a month. It's, again, simple first-grade arithmetic to figure out that you're not going to be able to pay rent with that. Not only pay rent and eat at the same time, but pay rent at all. Because in San Diego, the median rent for a one-bedroom, and these are a couple-year-old statistics, so it's worse now, is 151% of SSI benefits. So unless you're a real miracle worker, no budgeting is going to help. No classes in budgeting is going to help you solve that problem. In addition, there's been long waiting lists for Section 8. The Section 8 is underfunded, so there's way many more people who qualify for it than who can get it. In San Diego, the waits are like 8 or 10 years. And then there's been a lack of investment in public housing, which unfortunately got a bad name in the 70s because they let it they basically let it run to the ground. They didn't invest in keeping it in good shape, and so people say, see, public doesn't work. And then, so now there's no public investment in public housing. But there has been in the past, in certain parts of the country, really excellent public housing, quality public housing, and that is not happening. And same thing with public subsidized housing. The money is not being put into housing. So you have this whole factors coming together, creating this crisis. So what are some of the myths? What are some of the lies about homelessness? First, homelessness is blamed on bad choices. The idea that they're all drug addicts and the people who are so mentally impaired that they don't want a roof over their heads, they're not ready for it. This idea, which is false. Drug addiction is a small minority of people on the streets, and the increase in homelessness cannot be explained by addiction alone. The idea that people don't want housing. I mean, there are some people who've been on the streets so long that they're acculturated to it, but the large majority would love a decent place to live. They would love it. And there's a lot of patronizing attitudes towards people who are homeless, including in the city's programs, about helping people become ready for housing. Well, people are ready yesterday for housing. They're ready because everyone needs housing, and they don't need to be made ready for it. They're ready now or yesterday. There's a claim that's very widespread that the increases in homelessness can be attributable to the release of patients from mental institutions. This is false. Most patients in the deinstitutionalization that took place was in the 1950s and 60s. Homelessness did not increase until the 1980s. Despite the claims of people who promote forced treatment, most people with mental health challenges do not need to be institutionalized. And in addition, poverty and homelessness itself can create mental health disabilities and addictions. It always exacerbates them if you have them, and it can create them. It can create them from scratch because the trauma of being poor, the trauma of being homeless, the stress involved, you get a post-traumatic stress disorder type thing from just the experience of trying to survive on the streets. It's all about poverty. When in the 60s and 70s, they used to talk about the war on poverty. Now it's the war on the poor. That's what our city and many cities around the country have done, is to criminalize homeless people and deny that, to blame the victim, and rather than to understand what is going on in the whole society that's creating this crisis. So it's all about poverty, poverty, poverty. The growing gap between housing costs and income. This war on the poor, which I've been fighting against on behalf of people who live in vehicles, involves ticketing and arrests of homeless people, basically for the purpose of getting them out of the way so we don't have to see them and getting them to leave town. So that's the blame game that's going on. Homelessness and homelessness policies disproportionately hurt people with disabilities. People with disabilities who are unable to work or unable to find a job that will accommodate their disabilities and pay enough to live on, basically find themselves permanently priced out of the housing market. So you can have lots of housing navigators and counseling and budget, people help you with your budget, but there's no way it's going to work because there's no affordable housing there to navigate you to. So they're unable to afford housing with no end in sight. People without disabilities might have an end in sight, perhaps. They might be able to find a better job, get 2 jobs, or something that could get them off the streets or to be able to get housing. But people without disabilities are squeezed out permanently. The lack of affordable housing means that people with disabilities are often forced to live in institutional settings, like nursing homes, boarding care, psychiatric facilities, and hospitals and shelters, which are institutions as well. We have 40,000 people in the United States with mental health disabilities that reside in state mental health institutions. Many of those people could live in the community in their own apartments if housing was affordable to them. The shelter system is a complete disaster, and there's a lot of problems with it. One, it's often inaccessible to people with disabilities. The institutional setting deny any privacy and exacerbates many mental health disabilities. Many deny accommodations. They're supposed to accommodate you, but they don't. And not everyone knows their legal rights or are in a position to file a lawsuit, but their accommodations are denied. For example, a person may need to lie down during the day. A person may need to be with an emotional support animal. Even service dogs. I just had a case involving a shelter provider who turned down an actual trained service dog, and that person ended up in the streets because they wouldn't accept the service dog. And we resolved that issue for now, but the reality, he was smart enough to come, he was aware enough of us to come to us for help, but they don't always obey the law, and those places are, they're bad, they're very crowded and very unhealthy environments for people who already have mental health or physical disabilities. It's not a good place to live. And if you're on the streets, you have no place to keep your belongings. You're constantly faced with arrest or being ticketed. I'll talk about my case in a minute that I'm involved in. You might need to have medication that you can refrigerate. You don't have access to that, and you may die. So that's the situation people have, that they're very vulnerable to harms caused by homelessness and the inadequacy of the so-called solutions that are being put forth. Basically, we have what is called a shelter merry-go-round, that people, and have many clients who've gone through shelters, and of course they can't, either they can't afford the housing that's available, they're on SSI, or they're unable to work, or unable to work full-time, and so they go into a shelter, they're there for a few weeks, a few months, then they're out in the streets again, then they'll try to get into another shelter, and they might be there for a couple weeks or a couple months, and then they're out again onto the streets, and the little merry-go-round continues, and there's no resolution. They don't get placed. The 3 mega tents that are in downtown San Diego, paid for by the city, and this is shocking. You know how expensive it is to put someone in a tent, a big tent with no privacy? $1,800 a month they're paying for that. It's not going to, what's it going to? I don't know. Social workers or people like that, but $1,800 a month that actually could pay for actual rent. That money is going into every person who's in those tents, no privacy, big mega tents. Their record of placing people in permanent housing is atrocious. Only 14%, with all the money they're paying for the housing navigators and the counselors and all this, only 14% of the people who go through that program end up in permanent housing. So this system has completely failed. Let me tell you a little bit about my current litigation. The case is called Bloom versus City of San Diego. It's ongoing right now. It's a class action involving people who use RVs, campers, and other vehicles for shelter. A majority of our clients and our named plaintiffs have mental and or physical disabilities, including chronic illnesses. Many of them are senior citizens. There's some single mothers. We were challenging in the lawsuit 2 types of tickets. One was the vehicle habitation ordinance. Has anybody heard about the vehicle habitation ordinance? Okay. The vehicle habitation ordinance made it a crime to live in your car. Yeah. So, yeah, it was an infraction, but they made you pay money. Then you're poor, right? So that doesn't make sense to make you pay money because you're poor and living in a car. But the idea was, again, to try to disappear the homeless people who are homeless and force them out of the city. That's the point of it. So we had people who were ticketed under the vehicle habitation ordinance. And then we have another ordinance, especially for people who are lucky enough to have RVs. RVs, if they're working properly, can at least provide, water, bathroom, shower, cooking, facilities, storage facilities, including refrigeration. So it's really lucky to be able to have an RV. But the city didn't treat it like that. It just basically fined you more for living in an RV versus living in a regular car. Because if you were living in an RV, you were subjected to both tickets, actually, the vehicle habitation ordinance tickets and also the oversized vehicle tickets, which says you cannot park anywhere in the city between 2 and 6 a.m. If you're in an RV or camper. And then you get a higher ticket. The tickets for the vehicle habitation is $50. The oversized vehicle ordinance, since you're lucky enough to have an RV, is $100 plus the extra fees. And so in 21 days, they double. So it's a lot of money for someone like living on a fixed income. And then what happened was, and it happened to a bunch of our clients, is they were unable to pay the fines. They didn't have the money to pay the fines. Sometimes they'd skip food, meals, or not be able to pay for medication in order to pay for the fines. But sometimes they just weren't able to do it. And so if they had 5 or more unpaid tickets, then the city would take their RVs and throw them out in the streets. Right. That's really solving problems, don't you think? You're lucky enough to have a shelter like that, which is better than a homeless shelter, and they take it from you and they put you out in the streets. And sometimes in the middle of the night, this has happened to some of our people. So this is the kind of policy that the city has carried out. There was absolutely no options for legal parking for RVs. So we are litigating that case right now, but we did win a couple of victories. One is the court threw out the vehicle habitation ordinance as unconstitutional, and yay. and then the city council did the right thing, but they didn't have a lot of choice, and they repealed it. So that is gone for now. There's talk about trying to bring it back in some other form, and hopefully we will get people out to fight that, because they should not criminalize homelessness. They should solve homelessness by providing housing. They shouldn't treat people as criminals because they're homeless. So, and I wanted to just give if I can find it here in a sec, but what did I do with it? Here we go. One of our clients is actually a couple who had their RV taken, and what that was like when it was impounded by the city. And I'm just going to read from his declaration. On the day our RV was impounded, we were asleep when we heard a bang on the door at around 6 a.m. It was still dark out. The officer was at the door, and he informed me that we had 10 minutes until the tow truck would arrive to impound our RV. I tried to show the officer that the RV was legally registered and insured, but the officer advised me that the RV would still be towed for unpaid tickets. The officer told me to take as many of my belongings as I could in the few minutes I had before the tow truck arrived. I gathered what I could, but I advised the officer that I had nowhere to go and nowhere to store my belongings. The officer advised me that that was not his problem, and the RV was impounded. Nobody offered us any assistance. When the police officers and towing truck left, my wife and I were left alone in the dark with our dog and a very few of our belongings. We were able to retrieve some additional belongings and put them into a storage unit, but we could not afford to retrieve the RV from impound. Thus, our only home and shelter was lost. My wife and I had no place to go, so we lived unsheltered on the streets of San Diego for 2.5 months. We mostly slept in an alley with cardboard under our sleeping bags. At one point, it rained for 2 days, and we both got wet. So this is the kind of injustice and inhumanity that's being done by the people in the city, not the people in the city, the people running the city, who have created this crisis to begin with by allowing these speculators to run amok and do what they want and get rid of affordable housing. And they, instead of trying to take responsibility for the problem they created, they're making life even harder for people who are the victims of these policies. So who's next to be hit by the, who's next to be hit by the crisis? The canary in the mine has died or is in critical condition. Who's next? As the baby boomers retire without adequate retirement benefits, they too will end up homeless or living in their vehicles. We already have a large percentage of students homeless and living in their vehicles or living on the streets. What will happen? Will people who work one or more full-time jobs not be able to afford rent? Up in Northern California, where I started my talk, in Santa Clara County, there's a lot of people living in RVs. But guess what? They are not people with disabilities. They are not people on SSI. The majority of them have full-time jobs. That's the future that we're looking at if something major fundamental change is not happening, is not made to happen by the people. What are those real solutions to this crisis? The first thing we have to do when there is a crisis is to stop the bleeding. We have to repeal the Ellis Act and the Costa-Hawkins Act. That was the Proposition 10 that was on the ballot some months ago that unfortunately got defeated. The members of both parties in the legislature have refused to repeal either one of those acts. It was put on the ballot to repeal it, and unfortunately lots of lies were told, and that ended up, we are unable to pass that ordinance, or pass that, the ballot initiative to repeal Costa-Hawkins. So that's, Costa-Hawkins is still there, the Ellis Act is still there. We need to pass local rent control. We have nothing here in San Diego, nothing, no protection whatsoever. And even the weak rent control that's possible under Costa-Hawkins is still better than nothing. We need to end the criminalization of homelessness. Being homeless is not a crime. Being poor is not a crime. People who are homeless are victims of a system that is not working for the people of this city and of this state and country as well. We need to end the impoundments of vehicles that are used as shelter. We don't want to make a bad situation worse. If a person has any kind of vehicle, certainly an RV, but any kind of vehicle, that's better than being on the streets. We saw last year the hepatitis A epidemic about how life-threatening it is to live on the streets and how threatening it is to the health of the whole community. It makes no sense for anybody, for public health, or certainly for the people directly hit, to impound vehicles for unpaid tickets that are used as shelter. We can reduce the harm of homelessness by providing restrooms. That would have helped the hepatitis A epidemic as well. Showers, increase trash cans and pickups, and actually provide private tents and sleeping bags instead of confiscating them. They actually confiscate them, but the city should be providing that, anything to protect people from the elements. And I have another little story about one of our clients in the Bloom case. She lives in an RV, and all the people in her, there were a bunch of RVs near her in the beach area, and they were very conscientious about picking up garbage, not just for themselves, but that for all the tourists who would throw beer bottles all over the place. I mean, she was really, really conscientious, and they all were trying to help out. But the city wanted to get them out of there because they don't want anybody to live in their RV. They just, rather than be on the streets or whatever, or just get out of town. So they actually removed the garbage cans. That's smart. They removed the garbage cans to discourage the people from staying there. So this is the opposite of what should be happening. Instead of confiscating tents, you provide tents. Instead of confiscating sleeping bags, you provide sleeping bags. You provide trash cans. You provide pickups, more pickups. You provide restrooms and showers to minimize the harm as you put money into creating permanent housing and controlling the out-of-control rents that are going on in the city. You invest in affordable and accessible housing. You put money into permanent housing, not mega tents and not housing navigators that can have no place to navigate you to, no matter how hard they try. No more $1 million condos or expensive apartments. This city has approved the construction of tons and tons of buildings downtown. There's so much construction going on, you could barely walk down the street, and yet all those places, virtually no one in the city, not to speak of people who with disabilities on fixed incomes, but virtually no one in the city can afford. There are empty apartments that are being held for speculation or Airbnbs, empty apartments while people are on the streets. That should be over. We are in a crisis. We only build for people who live here. We don't build for speculators. And that's what I think needs to be done. Owners who leave apartments empty while people are homeless should be fined or be subjected to eminent domain. That's what I think should happen. We need to build quality public housing and publicly subsidized housing and utilize community land trusts to keep land in the community. And we need to expand the voucher programs, which are way, way underfunded. We need to have money into vouchers and require private landlords to take them. The one good thing the city did was it did pass an ordinance that is supposed to take effect this year. I'm not sure when it's taking effect, that says landlords cannot discriminate against Section 8 holders. There's been I have a lot of clients who are on Section 8 who haven't been able to use their voucher. They end up back on the streets. So that's one good thing the city did without being sued. Everything else seems to be when they're sued. But that was one thing they did because the situation is such a crisis. There was no landlords that would be voluntarily taking Section 8. And then we need to talk about increasing incomes to livable levels. There should be living wages for those who work. And for people on SSI or people who are unable to work, those payments need to be raised to a sustainable level. I mean, sustainable is enough to pay food, rent, and other necessities of life. If you're disabled or a senior citizen and unable to be in the workforce or unable to work full time, you should still have your basic needs met. And for just the sake of your humanity and our humanity, that no one should be in the disgraceful state we've allowed so many people to be falling into. That we need to stop the war on the poor, restart the war on poverty, and join a movement it's a national movement called Housing Not Handcuffs. And so join the Housing Not Handcuffs movement. And we have a local coalition called the San Diego Housing Emergency Alliance. That is a grassroots group of activists that's addressing the housing and homelessness crisis. And we've done some protests. We've been out there in the streets. When we first filed the lawsuit, we had a caravan of RV people drive around the city. There was lots of media that we got that way. And we do need more people to get involved in that. So if anyone's interested, please see me. We can get you on the list and start coming to meetings. So any questions? Discussion? Thoughts? Could you speak up a little bit?
I'm an SDSU student, and I do have a peer who is currently homeless, but to me, something that she shared with me was
You need to speak up a little bit. I'm having a hard time.
she told me that basically she would ask me, like, what are people like supposed to do? Like, we're not supposed to be in the streets, we can't be in shelters because they're overcrowded, then am I just supposed to float in the air?
I know. Well, that's it. Yeah. I mean, that's.
I understood what she meant by that, but I'm like, yeah, like, what are they supposed to do then?
Right.
We turn the cheek as we see them along the streets, and we pretend like they're not there.
Right.
But they're there.
Right.
And last week, when I was walking from San Diego State College, there was a mother, and she had a child, and she was just asking for some water for her formula for her child, and I asked her, like, is there anything else I could do for you? She's like, no, like, this is my life now, and I just could not wrap my head around how this is happening.
Yes. And this is, yeah, I mean, that's a really powerful story. We have to realize it was not like this before. I mean, for those of us who've been around a little longer, we know this is new. I used to go visit Tijuana, and as soon as I crossed the border, I would see people begging, women and children begging and things like that on the streets. And you go back to San Diego, go across the border, you didn't see that. Now it's all here. So this is a political problem. It's been created by policies that basically weakened the social safety net, weakened regulation, and allowed for real estate speculators to run amok and do what they want, regardless of the effect on people. And so we have to really organize, and that's one of my other things I like to do besides litigate, and that's to organize and really fight back. In 2002, there was a housing emergency that was called by the city council. There was a rally of about 1,000 people at downtown San Diego demanding action on the housing crisis. We crammed into the city council chambers, and we were very, very visible. Unfortunately, that movement dissipated. They set up a few committees, and nothing happened. And now we're in a worse situation, far worse than we were in 2002. So it really is going to take people saying that housing is a basic human right, which is what our message is. Housing is a basic human right, and that this is not acceptable, that these are our brothers and sisters, of our fellow residents of our city and of our country, and that they have a right to have a life too, and that we have to be aware, as I said, that the people who are being hit now are the canaries in the mine for the future that is facing all of us if something doesn't change. Yeah.
I've heard from multiple people, and I don't know if this is true, that a lot of the homeless are sent to California, like around the country. I don't know if that's true.
No.
Yeah.
No. Most of the large majority of people who are here are San Diegans. A lot of my clients, I have clients in the RV, in my homeless case, my Bloom case, who were born here. So they all have deep ties to San Diego, and so that's a large majority. People don't have the money to move around like that. This is our fellow San Diegans that are being treated like this. Any other comments or questions?
So what is the city doing about affordable housing?
Well, not much. Not much. As I said, they actually took money from the small affordable housing fund that the Housing Commission had and put it into the mega tents at $1,800 a person a pop a month. So they took money away from that. It's very, very small potatoes what they're doing. There's something called inclusionary housing. There's a little bit of money that developers put in if they don't want to build any affordable units. But even if they built the affordable units, it's a very small percentage of all the units being built, and we need 100% affordable units. So what they're doing is kind of like, when there's a flood, just taking a spoon and getting a little bit of water out when you're being drowning. It's completely ineffective. The only good things they've done is repeal the vehicle habitation ordinance, that because they were sued, and prohibiting Section 8 discrimination, which they actually did on their own, which is amazing. But otherwise, very little. I mean, they have to pay. They haven't done something like pass rent control, stop the bleeding, pass some kind of rent control. They haven't even done that. So.
What's something that ordinary citizens can do to help enact change as well? Because I understand your perspective as an attorney from the legislative standpoint, but the average Joe, what is it? You mentioned organizing. So what exactly does it look like? How we can help?
Well, as I said, in 2002, there was 1,000 people demonstrating for housing and demanding that the city declare a housing emergency, which they did, but they didn't follow up on that very well. So basically, it's being organizing, being visible, coming to meetings. It's really hard work, and coming out into the streets and protesting peacefully. I mean, that's really going to get the attention of the powers that be. We have to create our own movements. They have to be. It's the same thing that won the 8-hour day. People had strikes. They had marches and strikes. The civil rights movement, civil disobedience, and big, huge protests. That's the kind of grassroots organizing that's called for. And there's very little of it going on right now. but that's what really is needed. Otherwise, the situation is going to get worse. Any other questions or comments? That it?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Oh, and I just wanted to, there's a flyer put out by the Housing Emergency Alliance, and it's on the table. There's two versions of it, one in larger print. So if people want to pick that up, you can see what our program is and what we're fighting for.